6 o'clock, so I will call the meeting to order. This is the January 11th school board meeting. The chair expresses his regrets. He will be here within the next 10 to 15 minutes. He just got delayed in Montpelier. First item on the agenda is changes, additions, or an approval of agenda. Do we have any changes?
You had mentioned a list for the executive session. So
Okay, yeah.
mentioned when we get there.
Okay,
And then I forgot to put appointments of new staff on the agenda, but we do have a couple. And also if we could rearrange the order of the governance process for Julie to be able to get out of here a little early. If that's all right.
so
Maybe after the public reading of EL 10.
we would move the ends revisions proposals.
Yeah. If the
Okay.
board is so
That,
inclined.
is there any discussion on the proposed changes?
So consent agenda and governance process.
Yeah.
Text.
Hearing no discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item number 2, superintendent's report. I don't know how you plan to do that with no voice. but-
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna keep it real brief. Couple things, real quickly. Tomorrow night at the high school is an exhibition night, which is the students who are in the independent learning center presenting on their projects. Very exciting. If you want to see kids doing some great things, go. So 4 to 6 in the gym. You know, we had a great vacation. Everybody, felt rested. People I talked to, they felt like they really needed it. This week we've been finishing up on the budget proposals for tonight. I think one thing that's been interesting is changes in the cosmetology program at the tech center. They recently were required by the state to have licensing at the end of their 2-year program. So in the past, they always had to go on to another school to get their actual their licensing credentials. But what the state has required and what we've been able to do is offer full-time programming in their senior year so they can actually finish that licensing requirement. So that's a kind of a big change for us. Pretty successful with about 4 or 5 of the kids in that program. I think that was what I wanted to cover in my brief report, so I can talk a little bit later.
All right, just one thing I'll just ask right now is, in getting ready for the presentation of the budget, I was going to ask you, Tom, if I could enlist Roy and Julie's help in getting information on some of the good things that are happening. And one of those things that I think would be very powerful is within the rules about confidentiality, if we could take some video at exhibition night to present as part of my budget presentation. Because it would make it a little bit more interactive, because as my father said, less of me is more.
My picture says 1,000 words.
So I will contact the 2 of you and we'll figure out, like from the elementary side and then the secondary side, what we want to champion. That way we can illustrate where the tax dollars are going versus just giving them the news they're not going to want to hear.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion, questions for the superintendent? Okay, so now we'll move on to item 3, governance process. I see it, the public reading of the board's response to EL 10. I don't know who was supposed to read
That
that.
was going to be Coach who was going to read it. I believe we might as well, since we were going to reorganize it anyway, it goes directly to the ends discussion.
Okay,
And give Coach time to show up and read.
Perfect.
I'm cool with that. Any problem with that, Nancy?
No.
Okay, so that's what we'll do. We'll go on to the ends revisions.
I will. Everything you possibly want.
Okay, Roy's pulling up some drafts and documents, but I'll give a little bit of background about what we've done so far and, sort of what our procedure was. So we had shared with you, this is actually our old presentation from before, just as a reminder of, what we said we were going to do. And so if you want to just kind of go through to
Do you want to see some of the slideshow?
or I guess we can just go through.
Okay.
Go through, yeah. So again, this is just a reminder kind of where we were at. We had met this summer to talk about the ends and some revisions, and both in reporting and the drafts themselves that we collectively thought would really be updated and beneficial for how we look at students and programming in our district. So we had some plans for that we had again decided upon as a group over the summer in our retreat for how we might go about doing this. And so we had decided that we would try consolidating the 6 ends policies into 3, perhaps, to combine some to streamline them, make them a little bit more comprehensive. So taking academic excellence and updating that, combining life skills with health and well-being, and then combining citizenship and global awareness, and then integrating technology throughout those rather than having it be its own specific ends policy. So Roy and I spent some time over the past couple of months reading through the revisions, the suggestions and feedback and input that we had all come up with over the summer to think about how we could take what we had previously and revise and update and make it more aligned to not only our current focus on equity in our district and really thinking about how these reflect a lens of equity and social justice, but also aligned to Portrait of a Graduate for the state. And again, just taking the feedback that you would all come up with as you really dug into these this summer to try to make them more of what we thought would be relevant and useful at this point. So some of the things that we thought about when we created these drafts were updating language, updating sort of the way that things were phrased. Again, sort of thinking about how to make a shift from the ends policies to really being representative of programming and things that are in place in the district, and that these are how we look at student indicators are reflective of the things that we have happening in the district, decisions and programming. So these ends policies reflect things that we would see these things in students as a result of decisions and programming and things like that that we're enacting in the district. So some of that, language shift happened a little bit in the way we talked about, indicators, the things that students are showing are reflective of. And the other thing we did at this point was take out the rubrics, because again, we're looking at these being not student evaluative, but really reflective of the district work. And so you'll see that sort of shift in how they're framed. And so what we've done is create these 3 that integrate the 6 that were there prior. This is the first one, and this was academic excellence. We have turned it into personal excellence and learner agency, really focusing on individuals meeting their full potential rather than sort of targeted academic excellence. This is really sort of indicating all students living up to their full potential, and that integrates all content areas in authentic learning situations. So I don't know if we want to read through these, or just I could give just a quick, we could just do very quick summaries of each one, whatever you would like.
What is the pleasure of the board?
I think that the summary approach is
Yeah,
best,
sure.
and that we would
It's fine
then
with me too.
take these away and feels good. digest them and come back. That's the next meeting.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
I can deal with that, but I'll just add one thing that I would like to see for the next meeting as well. I know you have the indicators, but some idea of how we're gonna measure the indicators, because otherwise they
Yep.
could be perceived as just empty words.
Sure.
And we have to be better about that. But okay, so yeah, I agree with that. So we've done the individual, personal excellence and learner agency.
So this is well-being. This was how we integrated. I actually can't remember what the two
Life
was. Life
skills.
skills and health and well-being. Sorry, I lost it for a minute. And so this was taking those two things, and again, really taking into account the feedback around student safety, and really bringing that to the forefront. And so again, you'll see in here that we've integrated the feedback that you all had, and really are, rather than having it be focused on, students, that the advocacy piece is in their self-advocacy, but also understanding that they have to feel a sense of safety within their community and environment, and that they also can help to support that in others. So those being indicators of well-being.
Just an example of where the technology being embedded
Yeah.
would be the last indicator around understanding their digital footprint.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
trying to put it in ways that are much more
Yeah.
fit the time.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
You know.
And this last one being global citizenship, and again, this was combining two different policies, and so really looking at sort of how students view themselves within a community, school community, regional community, expanding to the state, to the country, and then as a global citizen. And then really thinking about what it looks like to be a member, to exercise your rights, to recognize both your civic rights and responsibilities as well as human rights, to have a critical lens when looking at events and whether they're current or through history, seeking to understand multiple perspectives, different viewpoints, different cultural backgrounds, in order to make sense of events and scenarios. And then thinking about how to be an active member of a problem-solving situation around issues of social injustice or environmental injustice, and being able to utilize your strengths to really promote positive change in those different nested aspects of community.
Oh, very good. I mean, I think these are definitely a very positive step in the right direction. Of course, since I was cranky today, I came up with Pradeep's. So I am going, and I think it would be appropriate that I will scan these and send them to the two of you, so you have at least a chance to think of your ways to shoot these down or respond to them. And that way we'll have a bit more productive discussion in our next meeting regarding this. And I would encourage, I will, I'll also send them to my fellow board members for information, not discussion purposes.
Exactly.
And I would encourage other board members to do the
Yes.
same if they have some thoughts.
And may I extend my thanks to you and your coworkers who pulled this together. Obviously, a lot of thought went into it. We appreciate and look forward to the conversation it's going to engender.
We look forward to it too. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other discussion at this point regarding the proposed revisions? So I think we can move on to the next area. The chair is now here, and I'll defer to him if he's ready for the reading of the board's response to EL 10, and I'll turn the meeting over to him, thank goodness.
Well, thank you all for your indulgence, and thank you, Russ, for taking the helm for us. We basically decided as a board to come up with this acknowledgement of our most recent meeting, which was 12/14/22, where we heard the monitoring report of EL 10. And just to forestall any confusion, because EL might make you think about elementary level, but this is part of our district policy mandates. There are 10 of them. And these particular ones are called executive limitations. So that's the EL. So I'm just going to read this. We're not going to necessarily have a discussion about it because everyone has had it from the district level in their mailboxes. So, Hartford School District family. The Hartford School Board of Directors meeting 12/14 had a number of items on its agenda. Yet two, an executive session for the purpose of discussing a grievance and monitoring report EL 10, race and equity, brought us to taking the following action. Board member Merrill motioned the board create a committee of the board to assist the administration looking at ways to improve our work in this area, with coach being the committee. And board member Russell seconded. The motion passed unanimously. The board, with its duty to offer clarity and transparency, would like to bring to your attention 3 board policies. EL 10, race and equity, and the anti-discrimination racism policy, and BSR 2. That's board responsibility under unity of control. As they are clearly the key principles driving the shift in the board's approach to working outside of its traditional policy governance structure. Related to our discussion, EL 10 race and equity policy states a number of expectations of the superintendent on behalf of the district. Provide an environment that supports the creation and implementation of culturally responsive instructional practices and curriculum. Provide professional development, training, and engagement opportunities to inform and practice cultural sensitivity and increase awareness of personal bias and inequities in leading, teaching, counseling, advising, and coaching practices. Recognize and value the wisdom and knowledge that students and families bring to each classroom, school, and our district as a whole. Our anti-racism policy states, purpose and policy. The purpose of this policy is to eliminate all forms of racism in the Hartford School District. The goals of this anti-racism policy include promoting critical thinking regarding the history, contribution, and perspectives of diverse ethnic and social groups, specifically those traditionally excluded from K-12 education. 2, incorporating classroom content and strategies that enable students to safely explore questions of identity and membership in diverse ethnic and social groups, racial equality, and racism. Creating engagement opportunities that provide families with a welcoming means of raising any certain about concern about their child's experience as it's related to racial, ethnic, or social identity at school. The policy scope applies to all schools, facilities, programs in the Hartford School District, and to all members of the Hartford School District, including but not limited to students, staff, volunteers, visitors, and teachers. Lastly, BSR 2, Unity of Control, only officially passed motions of the board are binding on the superintendent. Your school board has recommended ourselves and this district to the goals stated within our policies. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is work and is one of the most difficult undertakings we as a district, individually and collectively, can embark upon. Our understanding of who we are and who we want to be will be tested and made clear. Your board offers its support and commitment to all of you as you engage in our work. This is our house, and we have clear expectations for all within it. We are all hurricanes. Happy holiday, humbly, Kevin Coach Christie, Hartford School Board Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. So that
Is it appropriate? Sorry, how much voice for me to respond?
sure.
Sorry, bear with me. I don't know, my voice comes and goes, but I just want to respond a little because I want the board to know and the public to know that, you know, as an administrator or as the administration superintendent, we've been committed to this work. Recently, we became aware of some things that made us realize that we're not doing enough and we need to do more. So what I'm planning to do is take the policy statements, you know, 10, the anti-discrimination policy or anti-racism policy, and identify ways that we can quantify and calibrate progress toward those statements. And then we can report out much more accurately, you know, data and feedback on each of the statements. And then we also will be able to specifically develop ways to address any weakness, celebrate any success, and figure out ways to move forward. So sort of a strategic plan around this work so that you'll be able to gauge, are we doing well? Are we doing enough? What do we need to do more of? Do we need additional resources? I just wanted the board to know that. So thank you, and appreciate your reading those board changes.
Any other quick responses?
I guess the answer is that on behalf of the board, we appreciate your commitment to this process, and we are looking forward to the implementation of the expectations we have set out. And we thank you for your commitment to that.
Welcome.
Great. So we will continue our meeting. Moving right along. Consideration of applications for open board seat.
No, we advertise in the Valley News, we put a notification on the Hartford listserv, and we've had it posted for a while, since Walter Armstrong resigned her position. We've only received, or I only received one applicant from Douglas Heavysides, for the board somewhat familiar with from his work on the Wilder School Study Committee years ago. It's in your packet. It was in your packet the last time. So I don't know how the board would like to proceed, but.
Mr. Chair. May I
Yes.
say anything? If we were to only get one application, I could think of one I would be more welcoming to see. It was a privilege and a pleasure to work with Doug Heaviside Senior on the Wilder School Committee. And we, as a community, were fortunate not only for the technical prowess which we brought to the project based on years of experience working with similar kinds of projects for Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, where he built out numerous operating rooms and other large construction projects, but for the depth of his caring about this community and the students in this community. And I personally would be overjoyed to welcome him to the board.
My sentiments exactly.
Yeah, I mean, having worked with Doug on the Building and Facilities Committee, I do think he will make a fine addition to the board. And I mean, as Peter said, if this was only the only application, it's a good one.
And I would agree. So at this point, would you care?
I would like to move, we appoint Douglas Heavysides to the position of board member to fill out the remainder of the term, actually fill out the term until the next election. You make that right.
Right.
So
I second that.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor to accept the motion nominating Doug Heaviside Senior to be our board member through the end of the ensuing term. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
This is not really a discussion question, but I think somebody on the board should reach out to Doug and notify him that if he wants to run for a term, he needs to get his signatures in by the 30th.
Yes, very good.
Because that's rapidly approaching.
Yes.
can you do that, Tom?
Yeah.
Or you may only want to deal with us for a couple of months.
He might be not thinking past.
Yeah, that's, I was reading his application, so I think we need to clarify.
Okay, cool. So, FY24 budget, fourth draft.
All right. Well, it's that time of the year where we're narrowing things down and things becomes more and more clear with the budget. Much of what we're gonna know before the vote from the public is in the revenue figures from the state. Expenditures, Jake and I and the administrators have refined as much as possible at this point. So Jake's gonna go over where we're at on January 11th, and obviously our goal tonight is to try to come up with a final number. If that's possible, or at least a much clearer picture of what the board wants to present to the public in March. What do you want first, Chief?
Okay, so we'll look at the summary page, which should be,
Yeah, I left it separate, a separate page from your budget.
Budget summary changes.
yes,
Yeah.
Yep.
FY 20.
Yeah.
this one, yep. So, not much has really changed here. Obviously, we still have negotiations ongoing. But if you scroll down to the bottom, there have been some things that we've taken out, because, you know, the last draft was really, what do we want? What do we need? The Cadillac plan, obviously, we've gotten some yields and numbers and figures in there that have obviously shaped that and said, you know what, we can't really do all of that. So we've removed the interventionist, the SPED case manager, we're going to be moving towards grant funding on, and the new high school teacher kind of position we've removed. So presently, this kind of puts us at a $3.1 million increase. The next two pages in your packets are just the breakout of the function and object summary. If there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain that. But as we start to get some numbers, I'm really more interested in the projected ed state tax page.
Yo, are we doing questions? Is that?
If there are any for the function.
Oh, okay,
otherwise-
sorry, I missed that. I apologize. In the health insurance area.
Yeah.
Are our employees still covered under the HRA?
Yes,
What assumption did you make in setting aside funds for that?
we're assuming the 70% utilization.
And how does that compare to historical averages?
It's hard to really say because this is the first year where we've actually been on the hook for $1. Whereas previous years, the employer, you know, if you had a single plan, you were on the hook for the first 400, then the employer money would take over. Whereas, you know, now it's the employer dollar first, then the employee. So it's hard to say really what data we have because this is the first year where we've been on the hook.
Okay, so but it's 70, the assumption for right now is 70%.
Right, which is what we budgeted last year.
I understand.
FY 23, I should say.
For fiscal year 23 after discussion
Yeah.
last time around. Just curiosity, when are the food service and transportation contracts up?
Food service is renewed every year.
Okay,
So that one will be coming up at the end of this year, whether or not it's below the CPI index depends on, you know, whether or not we have to go back out to bid or not. And then we are in year one of the Butler bus contract. We signed an 8-year contract on that, and this is year one.
so at least for the transportation, we do have some stability
Right.
in pricing for the next, okay, perfect. I think that's all my specific questions at this point about the line items. I have some broader discussion questions later.
So, obviously, you know, Russ was right on the money with the yields. We presented a CLA of 78% last time. The CLA actually came in at 77.15. When you look at all the data across the board, everyone's CLA this year pretty well dropped, including ours. We did get our final equalized pupil, final in quotation marks, because Brad James has already said, you know, this is the final draft one, because there's always a little bit of ambiguity of some numbers get missed here or there. But as it is now, our equalized pupils are locked in at 1,311.85. Which, if you don't think the CLA has a big effect on taxes, it does, because if we stayed the same with, you know, last year's at 86.76%, we'd be looking at a 0% increase, but unfortunately it didn't. So presently with our expenses and everything, we're currently at a 10.5% increase on property taxes and 3.3 for income base.
So I think every time we have this discussion, it's critical to do the simple explanation of CLA. Because people need to understand what that is, and then the effect that it has on every budget that it's applied to. And the fact that when the CLA goes down, the tax rate goes up. We had a period over the past, let's say, 10 years, where the CLA was incrementally rising. And then over the last four years, it's been going in the other direction. And that's something that people need to understand. So if you would.
Sure. So Russ, you probably have more information on this, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but CLA is basically the common level of appraisal, which basically attributes, how much percentage of a town they're paying on the grand list and all that. So with the crazy housing thing we've had over the last couple of years, prices have certainly fluctuated and everything, and obviously everyone is losing out on it. So we're due for some reappraisal stuff.
I mean, that's basically correct. I'll just restate it, basically saying the 77.15 is the state's determination of what our grand list on the books reflects of the true fair market value of the properties here in Hartford. So in other words, the grand list is only 77% of the state's calculation of the true grand list. And part of the problem with this is it affects the tax rate, but it doesn't necessarily affect the amount of actual taxes we all would pay. Because if the grand list was at 100%, the tax rate would go down, but the actual tax would stay the same. Yes, there would be individual winners and losers depending upon when you bought your house versus what it's appraised for and all that other stuff. But overall, it is very frustrating because it isn't necessarily reflective of spending, the effect of spending on the tax rate. It's really an illustration of the grand list versus anything the school district has done or not done.
So the fact is that because of COVID and other impacts on our economy, all of a sudden people want to live here. And when people want to live here, they want to find a house. When they want to find a house and other people want to find a house, the price for the house goes up, which if you are a seller is a marvelous, wonderful thing. But if you're just sitting there in your property and all the houses around you that have sold have gone up in price, you're suddenly going to have a larger tax bill because the state has good reason to believe the value of your property is higher than it was before.
Yeah, and I mean, and the other thing about this, what was I going to say? I sort of lost the thought, sorry. Oh, I mean, the problem is this is a trailing indicator. From my own personal experience, the real estate market is cooling down and will be cooling down substantially over the next 6 to 12 months. But because we're at 77%, it's going to trigger a mandatory town-wide reappraisal at a time when the reappraised values, depending on how they're done, may not reflect actual market conditions.
Unfortunately, we sort of benefit when the whole lagging and everything else works in our favor, and understandably complain when it doesn't. It's never going to be a perfect fit.
And yeah, and any system this complicated really isn't good policy.
Agreed. And it certainly makes our lives more difficult.
And especially somebody dumb enough to get up in front of the public and present this.
Yep.
Are smart enough.
That's not a word I would use right now. I'm gonna get laryngitis.
But it is interesting to note that based on the table we have. In 22, the grand list was at, or the common level appraisal was at 93.3. Last year it was 86.76, and now it's 77.15, which shows there's been this continuing increase in the property values since the grand list was last evaluated.
And in the future years, if this holds true, at one point I asked the head of the appraisal valuation at the tax department, what happens in the year of a reappraisal? His honest answer was, I can't tell you, I don't understand the mathematics.
Oh, great.
He has geeks for that, but, or actually I could say math wizards, but so it just doesn't make good policy. And we can't control it, so we just have to accept it as what it is.
It's reverse budgeting. That's, you get the numbers and, okay, we want to land here, and do you actually land there? Close, but you don't land there exactly.
Mhm.
Well, just the entire equation has so many complicated indicators, the equalized pupils. We actually physically went up in the number of students this year in our schools. And after they run it through their process, we have 34 less students.
At some point, do we have the means, like the weights? Because I'm guessing the calculations based on information we provide.
Yes.
So if we had an idea of the weights, next budget season, we should be able to come up with a more accurate as we start the tentative process, correct?
Right.
And part of my understanding is way back when the weights for students were developed, they weren't necessarily based on fact, they were based on people's perception of fact back then. So that's the other issue we have here.
Except that with the enactment of the application of the system, that has changed as well at the end of the last session. So we actually have a kind of a storm that's mixing, and then we have the yields coming into the equation as well.
Mhm.
So we've seen this storm before, and sometimes you just have to hold on until the end of the session to see where you ended up at the end of the ride, because it feels that way.
And I've experienced that personally in my practice, where I've told people what they could expect as a guesstimate of their property tax adjustment. And then our wise legislators changed the formula, so they ended up getting much less. And somehow that was my problem.
Yeah.
So that's the other piece to this.
And I mean, if essentially the yield is the only thing that, and the increase in the yield is about the only thing that worked in our favor this year.
Right.
And I mean, that's a historical increase in terms of dollars, because I went back 10 or 12 years and it's never been this much.
That surplus that they've had used to buy up those yields has.
But that's going away. So I
Yes.
think historically, and something for the board to consider is historically, or let's say next year, the increase is probably going to revert closer to historical numbers, because I doubt the state's going to have the same surplus.
Right.
So this is a very significant number, and obviously difficult to follow, and equally difficult to try to explain. And one is tempted to look at this and see if there are ways to smooth this. But every time we do that, what we have to balance is the ways we have to smooth it are to provide less services to our children, or to spend down some of our reserve funds or something like that to take money again away from the future and to spend it now. If it was a one-time thing, maybe it would make sense to spend down our reserves to reduce the tax burden to sort of get past this. But every time we do that, we're reducing the amount of money we have to deal with leaky roofs and other long delayed problems that we have put off dealing with. So we really have to think about our choices and how much we can play with this and how much we're willing to shortchange our children and our future.
Which is a very valid point. However, one thing that occurs to me is we are in a historic inflationary period. And in the past, when things were about 3%, 2%, relying on the previous year's budget and information made sense. Now that we're at 8%, and with the Fed and the Open Market Committee aggressively taking actions to lower the inflation rate, I wonder if we could be I'm more aggressive, less conservative. And for example, I'm just going to pick a light item just for illustrative purposes. Snow plowing. That like doubled in the budget type thing.
Yeah.
And I understand current market, they can name their price because there's not enough people. But if we do hit a recessionary period and as interest rates go up and there's less home improvement, more people, because I have a lot of clients who are contractors and plow snow and this, that, and the other thing. They're so busy that they don't really want to plow snow right now, but they'll be looking for that work possibly in a year to 18 months. So maybe as a compromise, because I understand we have to be prudent and we can't necessarily wish things to be better, but maybe as a compromise procedure, and I don't know if this is legal, but maybe split the difference. Still think there's going to be a substantial increase, but not necessarily as much of one, but yet not buy down the tax rate, but set some money aside for a contingency in case we are wrong. It's slightly different terminology, but that way we're not asking the taxpayers, or we're being considerate of the taxpayers, the circumstances, and we have to accept some risk and think in this environment versus playing it safe. And as I said last year, we're in a fortunate position. We do have a fund balance, whereas in the past that wasn't the case. So perhaps it is in the interest of the taxpayers, as well as protecting the school, to look at some of these numbers and scale them back with the understanding we are taking a risk.
As an idea, I'm receptive to it. However, the particular example presented does cause a problem for me. Since I understand we basically base that on the current contract, which we're already in and therefore are obligated under.
It's year one of year two.
Okay, so that's for example.
Yeah.
But certainly, I mean, if there's a
Principle.
if there's a number that the board is looking for, say, get us down to 7%. Maybe there's a combination of, some reductions within the budget and some buy down money that gets us there. If there's a number like that, I'd love to hear it, but.
Yeah, is there a particular place you're comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, our job is to judge how much hurt we want to inflict on our fellow taxpayers, and then it's their job to try to get there.
And see what's happened in the past. And just looking at these historical fluctuations. We have to do the best approximation we can, as the board. And the other piece that plays into this, is everything that Russell mentioned. as far as, we're not sure yet. How the legislature is going to address the surplus that's in the ed fund itself. Because that's a direct correlation on tax rate. Because that's where all of our money goes. Our money goes into the ed fund from across the state. So everybody pays for our kids. Everybody pays for the 87,000 kids that we are responsible for, one way or another, either through the balancing of all of these factors that they put into the equation to equalize the students. But at the end of the day, there's only one ed fund, and all students are paid and all towns are paid through that fund. The goal is to try to have the least amount of impact, or I should say drastic impact, on as many towns as possible. But like you had mentioned, there's winners and losers in this, process. And over the past few years, we've been in a little better position, but it's not.
Hey.
Yes, okay, go ahead.
I just have a question. When we first started this discussion, you said that we had cut out. And could you give me those positions or that you said?
Was an interventionist, the SPED case manager, and the HHS teacher. Whereas the interventionist right now is currently being ESSER funded. The SPED case manager is currently local, but want to push that to grant funding. And then the HHS teacher position is a hypothetical for next year. There's no one in the current position. It's a new position.
So those are the three that we took out.
Yes.
Okay, I just want, thank you very much.
So we have to understand that part of this is out of our control because it's dependent on yields and tax calculations and so forth. Additionally, part of it is out of our control because there have been increases in costs. There are various numbers to look at in terms of what inflation was over the last year, but the numbers that have come in are more or less in the 8 to 8.5% range. And if you look at our 10.5%, it basically means that adjusting for inflation, we had a 2% increase in what we're asking for. Which to me doesn't seem like a whole lot given our increasing appetite for trying to make sure that our kids are educated and getting what they need in terms of services, dealing with the mental health issues that we need to address, all the disruptions that happen to their lives and so forth. So looking at that isn't huge, but that does mean that hidden in that number is just what happened to the economy as a whole. Which, reduces our ability to be as generous as we would like to be. Given the burden and everything else, I would like to suggest, and this hurts me to do it because I don't like making this kind of thing, that we ask the superintendent to come back with a 8.5 instead of a 10.5 increase. That reduction to be met through a reduction of our ambitions towards programs and a spend down of some portion of our reserves. But that's sort of to start the conversation. It's not the number I'm wedded to. I'm just trying to come up with something that makes sense to me, as much emotionally as intellectually.
And I mean, again, the number we will discuss.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that I'd just like to say publicly is in doing the cost or reducing the ambitions or whatever we want to call the use, we also have to recognize that a number of positions that were added under ESSER funds are still desperately needed.
Oh, definitely.
There is still a real mental health problem within our school system that has to be addressed. So I would be very hesitant to approve any budget that takes away some of what we've done in those areas. So I'm making an impossible task even more impossible, basically. And that's my privilege as a board member.
And that part, I really reflect that same kind of thing. You guys know how, you know where my passion is for this and the problems that our kids are having and our staff, come on, let's face it, our staff are still having just as much emotional problems and mental health issues as our kids are. And I see it every day. Well, and I hope realistically that we don't have to cut the things that I don't think that we can feasibly give our kids the education that we are responsible for giving to them as the school board if we can't help them get through some more of these mental health issues. And mental health is not just being depressed or anxiety. There's just so much more going on in our community, mental health wise. And I just think it would be a real crying shame. And I think I would be embarrassed if we had to cut that much stuff out for that particular reason. I would rather put a bucket under a leaky roof for a while and I'm sorry, and give these kids and the
Well,
staff
that's what
help.
spending down the reserves would mean. So I mean, part of the solution would be we look to
Yeah,
future expenditures in some ways.
yeah.
And just sort of do that. Though, quite frankly, if we are going to put off those kinds of things, I do not want to return to the bad old days where cans just get down the road until the can is turned into a pile of tin, or turned into a pile of rust. We need to identify specifically what we are delaying and make explicit commitments to when we will deal with these issues.
I agree with that.
But
One of the things, we've done that reasonably well, as a board. Because our primary commitment has always been to our students. And so that, and our staff. And that has been very clear. One of the things that came up today in some of our witness testimony at the legislature is the exact same thing in state government. Okay. One of the witnesses that came in were from the crimes against youth team from the AG's office. And during COVID, there was a 400% increase in the amount of cases around protecting children on internet crimes. And so that in itself is massive. But one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that team of 6 who deal with that issue are under a lot of stress as well. Because could you imagine viewing this to make a case? So just like we're talking about, how important the mental health, of our students are and our staff, so that we can continue to do our work, we're running into that, like everywhere, because, there are so much pressures on, just people's psyche to do good work. So we have to keep that in the equation, as we're working through this.
I had a very long conversation with Kathy Hemingway yesterday, who was in charge of DCF. And she is just beside herself. She's now doing 3 positions of work because they can't get enough staff over there, which in turn affects the families and the children that are involved in that agency. And it's just like a vicious circle. Yeah, it's a vicious circle.
Russ, just from a policy and perspective, one thing that I think we really, and I mean, I know we're not really supposed to dive into the specifics, but I am troubled by how much the athletics budget has increased over the last 2 years. I mean, essentially, if you take it from budget fiscal 22 to now, it's up 31%. Our general education spending is up 20%. And while it's very admirable that our athletic director promotes and encourages additional activities, and that's his job, so I can't fault him for that. I think we really need to think about how much more can we say yes, and should we be saying no to some of these things? It pains me because as you know, my own daughter was a very active athlete. And I guess my other concern is that it doesn't show up in here, but what level of increases are we providing to the drama or music departments? Do they, yes, the per pupil spending's less, but in terms of equity, shouldn't we be considering boosting their spending? And one of the issues I've heard, and again, I don't know if this is true or not, they don't have as strong an advocate as the athletic director to put forth their request for money. So, I mean, and granted, a lot of the increase happened in the last budget, which I didn't raise an issue. So, I mean, I'm being a little bit of a hypocrite, but I do think it's something that needs to be addressed, especially in the future. Because I really think in 5 to 10 years, the funding model for athletics is going to radically change. And I think we're going to get to a club sports type thing with scholarships provided by the district for those who can't afford the things, because I'm not sure the level of participation in athletics. And from personal experience, I know football games are well attended, but some of the other sports, it's the parents, which is great because I went to all the games, but they don't benefit as wide a distribution. So it comes down to, as we make tough choices, and we're asking the taxpayers to endure some pain, we may have to endure some flack as we go forth with asking Jacob and Tom to come down with cuts type thing. And I guess the other thing overall, in the past, we've tried to weigh what would pass, which is part of our responsibility. We may have to decide to be a little bit more risk and say, we're going to advocate for this. It may take more work, more public sessions, more grassroots, but not necessarily be afraid to propose maybe an 8% budget if that maintains quality of school. Because I've said it many times, quality of school is like homeowners insurance. It protects the value of your home.
Yes, if you want the CLA to go up, stop supporting your schools. Because nobody will want to live in your area, and the valuation that it's 15 years old for your house will be higher than it's actually worth.
And again, sometimes that's perception versus reality, because we can think of towns where the perception is that the school system isn't quite as good. That may or may not be true, but it's what board actions taken and administration goes a long way in putting forth the commitment to quality.
Yeah. And sorry, it's probably painful to listen to me, but I'm not in any pain. I feel fine. But I got to weigh in a little bit. We've been really supportive of activities that kids want to engage in. So given the mental health needs of the population, I've been very supportive to increase sports this year. We had a volleyball team. We've greatly expanded a lot of our offerings because we have the numbers. We haven't done it just because. So obviously, in times like this, we've got to think, about what reductions we can make. And I'll seriously consider everything everyone said, but it hasn't just been let's add. When there's a need, we add. Where kids are interested, we've added. We have a ski team for the first time in years, snowboarding. there's a lot of numbers and, again, I did it because of the mental health needs and keeping kids off the street, so to speak, and engaged in pro-social, positive type activities. So, we have had a lot of increases in drama too. I haven't compared them, but I think your point's well taken. There should be equity between the two. And we can look at that as we.
And I didn't mean to imply otherwise, because I understand that, but unfortunately, we can't be all things to all people.
Oh, I know.
And I mean, and I don't even know if this is legal, but maybe you start with maybe a voluntary contribution for your child to pay athletics. And if somebody objects for moral finance, they can just object, so they would not have to pay that thing. So that would take away any shame perhaps, because there may be parents who are fully able to pay and say, no, my tax dollar, I pay enough in taxes, why should I do this?
Right.
But I mean, I think we also need to be creative.
Yeah.
Back to my comment about switching, going towards a club model.
Yeah.
And I also do think we may have to have discussions with our very supportive and active booster group in terms of.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because up until this point, we've really been working to increase our attractiveness. And I've worked really hard. That's been a board goal and certainly something that I've, adopted. And, we've been doing that. We've increasing the population the last couple of years. It didn't show up, unfortunately, because of the change in the way they do the equalized calculation. But we do have a bigger number at the high school this year, it's like 30 kids. And it's because we've done so much. So you always have to be careful, not to sort of cut your nose off to spite your face type of thing. But that's what I've seen over the years with this. But obviously we got to get spending down. I think 8.5 or whatever the board's pleasure is. I'll work hard to make sure it's as painless as possible. But I think, I can do it. There's always going to be some pain, but we're in a weird place right now in our economy, in our country, and the schools.
Jacob, one of the interesting things, and it's unique to schools like ours, which are not like others in the sense that we're on the border. So we attract students from the New Hampshire system, not the Vermont system. How does that play into that equation? Do they penalize us for doing that? Because, in a way, that's problematic, obviously, So in the calculation, do those tuitioned students from those other districts that we serve, they're not factored into the equalized pupil, right?
Correct. It's purely Hartford kids that are factored in, not our tuition students at all.
Regardless of the state.
Right.
Okay, all right. That was the big question, our tuition students and how that affects the bottom line.
I'll just say, as far as our tech center program, I mean, we get a good portion of our tech center kids from, the New Hampshire, the Mascots, and all that.
Yeah, so those tuition kids are not at all part of that calculation for the equalized pupils.
But they are part of the local revenue calculation.
Right,
Right.
So it does affect the spending per student.
right.
Type thing, and
Exactly.
that's why it is to our benefit to stay attractive.
Right.
Because we do end up, quote unquote, making money,
Yeah.
especially since we're not at 100% capacity.
And those sort of extras are the things that are very attractive. And it's like options on a car. There's everybody's offering the English, the math, the science, maybe not as much as we do, much variety, but they're not all offering snowboarding and downhill skiing and volleyball and tennis and golf and bass fishing. So again, I mean, You have to look at it all, but I just want to be careful.
You're right, it is good for the mental health. Because it gets some of those kids out that may be just sitting there on their phones all the time. And as Julie was saying a while ago, when she was talking about the ends, kids learn differently. So not to say things.
Yeah, I
against
don't
what
take
you were
offense.
saying, I know you don't, I just want to say it.
Give it to me.
That- But I think that having the athletic stuff, all the activities that we offer for them, for the kids coming in, not just the Hartford kids, but for the kids that come over to the tech center, because I had lunch with a young man yesterday from Lebanon, and he has nothing but high praises for Hartford School. And I just sat there and he just went on and on and on and on. And I've been into this school and I've been to this school, and this is the only school I would ever come back to. He's a junior, he'll be a senior next year. He's so excited to come back to our school. And that was very encouraging for me to hear that. But going back to the athletic things, they learn so much that we couldn't teach them in a classroom. How to be a team player, consequences, you know, that are not suspensions. Oh, well, I was the one out there, man, I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna make all the home runs and I'm not gonna be a team player, and then it affects the whole team. And so then they've learned that natural consequence of, no, I have to be a team player. When I get to college or when I go out for a job, I'm gonna have to work as a team. We work as a team. And so I think the athletic part is really important.
Well,
I just think it's really.
no,
important
I'm
for
not
these
disagreeing
kids.
with you. I'm really going to say that given our form of governance,
Mhm.
while we can say we would like the number to be X or fall within a range or something, we're not really able to say cut athletics or cut. We can have a conversation that in some ways guides the superintendent, but because the superintendent runs the schools, how he fits within the budget
Right.
is, quite frankly, very much up to him. And we have to trust him to do it as wisely and judiciously and equitably as possible.
I agree with Peter in spirit. I mean, technically, we could. But that's not the way we operate. And I fully acknowledge that, Peter.
But we really need to come to sort of how much,
May I,
yeah,
since we're not gonna resolve this tonight, it's pretty obvious. I suggest that maybe we ask the superintendent to run maybe 1 or 2 or 3 scenarios. I personally would say, wouldn't it be great, and great's not the right word, wouldn't it be the lesser of many evils if we came in with an increase of 7.95%? So much like the pricing theory of 7.99, we're below the rate of inflation. I mean, granted, it is only, but, and then maybe you're 8.5, and then illustrate the decisions he made to get to the 7.95. And then we can weigh in with our judgment as whether he executed his authority properly.
we can then choose among the choices.
Yes.
And that's clear
That makes sense to me.
for, not only for the board, but for the community as well.
Exactly, because that way we can say, we did make a commitment,
Right.
even as bad as this is, because it is bad. There isn't going to be no way to sugarcoat that. We did recognize, yeah.
And I welcome that approach. As I said, my proposing the number I did was as much based on emotion as anything else. I don't have a great feeling for what the actual cost of keeping it to only the rate of inflation is going to mean. Reducing it even more, so we're effectively giving a cut to services or expenditures because inflation is higher. Doesn't feel good to me. But at the same time, let's look at, see what it actually means. So. So we have then proposed three options. We have the budget as presented to us. We have at the rate of inflation with the inflation nominally accounted as 8.5%. And then a 7.95, effectively 8%. If you could model those for us, and when you do that, please clarify what we're losing.
Right,
When we,
that has to be part of it, because, we couldn't just say, this is the new number.
Right.
We need to justify,
right,
for clarity and transparency, why. So,
And I mean, part of it is we also, as we make our presentation and why costs are up. Right now, we're not competitive in certain support areas. And until we are competitive, we're not gonna have enough janitors, which is a problem. Because we're overworking our existing janitors. Thank you for your hard work. And we won't attract people. That may change, but we can't necessarily make that presumption. So yeah, I like that. I think and that allows them to judge whether or not they can make certain more aggressive numbers in individual line items versus the buy down.
we've had to do this before.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because this isn't the first time we've run into this particular type of a buzz cycle. Being that, we've experienced this before, it's only a reasonable, approach. My biggest concern is timing. As far as reports, warnings, and whatnot. So I guess that is a timeline issue, which might require us to do a special meeting in order to fit the timeline.
And I fully anticipated that. Because I think that we've also done in the past.
Exactly.
And I think it would be a single topic type meeting.
Oh, yeah. It's the budget, it is.
It's the budget, baby.
It's formulating that number, so that, it's correct. The other thing, so all of that would be part of the discussion.
Thank you.
and thank you for the hard work that's gotten to get us this far.
Because it isn't easy.
It's always a chore to get to this point, but then the refinement is critical.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.
As always.
And you'll be there in February, right?
Well, we always have that, it's almost like the side judge. You have to have that side judge.
I was thinking more of the relief.
Yeah. Well, what do they call that? On that game show. Phone a friend.
Oh, yes, phone a friend.
So Jacob, you're the phone a friend. Okay. The ends revisions.
We did.
Okay. The equity grant, did you talk?
Yeah, equity grant, the board knows it received an equity grant from the VSBA. I think it was about $2,000. And I just wanted to know what you wanted to do with it. We certainly have an idea, but I don't know if the board had an idea when they requested.
Well, what we would normally do is want to hear your proposal.
Yeah, I mean, our goal or our thought was really to have an attorney or someone that's studying to be an attorney do a review of our policies and procedures to make sure that they're all in line with our equity work. I don't know how far it will go, because it's not that much money, but if we could get a few key policies done, that would be wonderful. Maybe it could serve as a model for us. Unless Peter thinks he can do that work. It just seems like such an abundance, huge.
It changes all the time right now. It's just,
Mm.
you think you've got it right down to a T, and then boom,
Chasing that
something else
tail.
pops up. You have to change it.
The only thing I would add to that, I'm sorry, Peter.
Going to where?
Is that in the district right now, we've talked about the teachers are reading the next book around equity and trauma informed practices, and one of the chapters really focuses on, are your policies and procedures in line with this work, and are you starting behind where you need to be? Like, are your policies forcing you to impact trauma and impart trauma on your students when we need to change how we, it talks about attendance policies, it talks about, suspension policies that as they relate to, let's say, substances. It's just reviewing everything that we do that in past practice was what we thought was right.
Right.
Or recommended.
Exactly.
Recommended
So,
by the-
so
See,
that's the thought process when we offer that suggestion.
see, it's pretty simple. Okay, there are some things that, don't require a lot of, thought. And this is one of them. If the system has failed for kids, we need to fix it. We know that is a failing portion of the equation. So we've been given an opportunity, through the grant to help us fix the foundational piece of this problem.
So the problem is that it can be very difficult to see whether or not a policy has a adverse effect on one population or another without actually looking at what happens as it's administered. That it's not just a legal analysis, it's a practical what has happened analysis, because consequences of rules are not always what you think they're going to be.
See, here's the thing in that regard, because we're dealing with this, we're statewide, we're dealing with national, we're dealing with district by district. There are a number of tools available to do what we're suggesting. The specific piece around having a lens that will filter those questions. And what it does is it forces you to make that, that critical thought. And those adjustments that you make through that process put you in a much better position than you've ever been before. So I think a critical piece of this is, the lenses that we choose to use to do the analysis. And there are equity lens tools that are.
The question I have is, given the relatively small amount of money we have, would we be able to actually find somebody who could do a better job of researching the tools and trying to apply them than we could do ourselves? Because
That's the ultimate question.
because we could, assuming it would be us, not just some they out there that would have to do the digging and so forth. I am assured of our commitment to trying to do it. But it is very easy to have blind spots. and not to have the relevant experiences that let you see that something that is on the face of it entirely neutral isn't when applied through a lens of explicit or implicit biases that warp and away something that appears to be neutral is actually administered, because often it's not the policy itself. It's the fact that the policy is looked at and in some cases applied to the letter as harshly as possibly. In other cases, oh, you poor child, we don't want to do that to you. And when the two different approaches to administering the same policy end up being based on somebody's race or gender or sexual expression or gender identity or whatever it is, it's not really the policy necessarily, though maybe changing the policy will remove the opportunity to behave in those divergent in different ways. So I'm entirely sympathetic to the idea of the analysis. I'm just questioning, would we be better off spending the money to hire somebody to advise us and help us and assist us rather than do it for us? Or what?
Right. Have a conversation with us
Yeah.
about particular
Right.
areas to look for, or even the author who
Right.
wrote this chapter, to
Mhm.
consult with the policy team to
Yeah.
identify problematic areas of problematic language or areas she's seen in the past that are
Because
red flags.
it isn't always evident
Yeah,
on the face of the document. Just looking at the
Yeah.
language, that, oh, this is going to result in an unequitable, unfair, unjust, racist application.
So I guess to move the question along a little bit. I'd like to offer a suggestion.
Yeah.
That we go ahead and being that one of the supports that we're using as a district, is that book. That being said, one of the things that have been identified in the book is policy. We as a state are doing that now with every bill and every budget line that is passed of the $8.7 billion is being analyzed on how does it affect Vermonters of all stripes. And you noticed how emphatic was. That's going on as we speak. It took us 5 years to get to that point. And now we're doing it, that analysis on the budget side. The more difficult side is the policy side. And it's taken us 4 years to get to the point of developing a tool to do the everyday analysis in all 13 committees, all 150 legislators working in the same direction, utilizing that lens. So that being said, I think that it behooves us as a district to go ahead and look at that type of analysis, for us. And thinking, in those terms are going to put us in a much better position.
Right.
So
I don't think $2,000 will stretch far enough to do an analysis at all. It may be resources that can be used to educate us, to bring in a witness or two, or somebody to speak to us. And I would certainly think that would be something,
it's an appropriate use of the funds.
right,
If you, the team, the policy team, were able to get, just as an example, the author. And she says, oh, I'll come. And you say, well, we'd like to offer you an honorarium, and you guys can offer that honorarium, in order to, just say thank you.
Have a conversation, just to start it.
Right, to get you guys into developing a lens, because the lens we might have to develop could be a modified version of what some of the folks are using, in other areas of the state that have been found to be parallel to what she is suggesting to do. So.
I'm not against that usage, I just want to be aware of the limitations. $2,000 is certainly a whole lot better than a stick in the eye, but it also doesn't get you terribly far. And that does imply an awful lot of late nights together. So, remember what you're signing up for.
But when you're ready to, to sit down with it,
Well, you're the 10 guy. We invited him.
But, so anyways, I think that if we approach it, from, the author's perspective, that'll give us a good, focus to get started. There are, like I said, a number of tools that have been validated that could help us, and then we can determine like how we want to implement them. Because in some cases it might be procedure versus the policy itself. The policy might be a rock and roll policy, but our procedures are a little funky.
Or it's not either the policy or the procedure, it's the people who are actually administering it, and
But if you ask
we
the
have to
right,
figure out how to
see,
change that, and maybe there is language that can do that, maybe there is an education process that can do that. But yeah,
some of the lens tools during the course of the evaluation of the tools told us exactly that. So you went through the policy and you went using the tool, the lens, you went, this lens answers everything, so why do we still have a problem? And then you did the procedure and you went, ugh, it's a little, edgy. And then when you got to the last question and it said, who does this affect? And you go, oh, wow, that piece. So anyways.
all right.
Yes, sir. It's all good. It's all good. This wasn't.
Maybe a case of be careful what you ask for.
I was trying to find a metaphor too. I was thinking like, you said a stick in the eye. I was thinking.
Yes, so basically, we entrust the policy committee to spend the money in the best way possible,
Exactly.
acknowledging it's not a heck of a lot of money.
There you go. I agree with that.
Does buy a lot of Volkswagen parts though.
Oh my goodness.
In my case, mountain bike stuff, yes.
Or in my case, espresso coffee. No.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So, policy adoption, second read, non-discriminatory mascot.
So you seen this before, it's pretty straightforward, clear what the intent is. Given the fact that it's hard to think of a discriminatory approach to a hurricane, probably doesn't affect us too much, at least not directly. But it is necessary, it is required by state law, and we do need to have it. So.
With all that in mind, my only question is under the complaint section. Why is an basically, it's sort of different than our normal process to mitigate or deal with differences of opinion.
Mhm.
The policy allows somebody with a difference of opinion to come straight to us versus going through the quote unquote normal chains of command. I'm just wondering if that's by statute, by decision.
That was the language that was in the model presented by the School Boards Association, and the part that we threw out parts of this already. And we got to part and said, yeah, this is what they say we have to have, okay.
Fair enough. And I mean,
Oh,
as
yeah.
long as we acknowledge that,
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. And I think the other thing though is, and I obviously this can't happen overnight, but I think I would appreciate a follow-up report from the superintendent. Oh, I get one other question is periodically under 4, number 1, periodically assist. I would like to see some type of interval, annually, quarterly, because given ambiguity and the conflicts and too little time and too much to do, it is possible for this to fall by the wayside, even if it's every 2 years. Just some type of, it's going to be done at least this often. And then,
Actually, I think you pointed out something that got past me. I'm pretty sure that in the draft, we intended to do the word periodically struck. That was in the language itself, and we had a long argument about why would you return to the periodically, you should return to it if there's been a change or update to policy or anything. And I think we had intended to take out periodically, so I wouldn't object to either specifying a period or removing the word entirely at the discretion of the board. Because I'm not sure that with it, if it maybe
See,
every couple of years, maybe, or something.
yeah, it doesn't have to happen often,
Right,
and I can see your point that it would, as the need arises.
Mhm.
So we could strike periodically.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we could say the intent is on a case by case when needed.
Yeah.
See,
So-
because what generated all of this are those districts that had inappropriate mascots.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Peter said at the beginning, it's really hard to find anything inappropriate about hurricane.
Doesn't mean you really want one to visit again.
Except we don't want them in Vermont. But other than that, it's, we've experienced that, like
Right.
around the state, where, some people had adopted, a radical mascot. The board one year took it away, and then the next year, the board put it back in. So it's like, it's schizophrenia over,
So in the world of cybersecurity, which I operate a lot, there is often a requirement that you reevaluate the risk associated with the system if there is any significant change to it. So, or
that's the point.
or on an annual basis. So it's either every year or if there's a major choice. So I don't have a problem with the once a year we look over and make sure there's nothing that happened that sneaked by us. And or if we notice something big that would work. So I'm more than amenable to either approach. You just say on an annual basis. That would certainly work. So on an annual basis.
Okay, and it could be as simple as no problems were noted.
Yeah, nothing changed.
But that also then puts the impetus on the administration to actually consider it on an annual basis.
Right.
Okay, so I can live with that.
All right, so.
So as amended,
Bring it back next time.
Well, no, this is the second reading, we just make the change.
As amended.
All right.
And then I guess I would ask Tom for a realistic timeline for writing up the procedures to implement this policy. because it does say develop a procedure for an individual to file a complaint. And I mean, granted, there's too much going on, so it's not an immediate, but again, just so it doesn't fall by the wayside. Because if we have it written in the policy, we need the procedure
Exactly.
to make sure we're adhering to the policy.
You know, because some policies have their own procedures already built in, and then some don't. We have to develop them directly. And this is one we have to develop here.
Yes, in the eyes of the tax code, there is jurisdictional regulations and then there's discretionary regulations of the IRS. So it's the same context.
What do you think would be reasonable? What do you think would be reasonable for procedure?
That's up to you, Tom. I mean, because you know best how you have to prioritize things. And while this is important,
Well,
I wouldn't
let's-
say-
Let's give them a deadline, just because.
okay, yeah, one works better with one. Yep.
So let's say that within a year, we expect us to produce an actual procedure. Or you-
The complaint actually is getting close to the procedure.
Yeah,
so
it's not that.
Have to follow, so.
yeah,
I would hope I could do it before then.
yeah, I know, but we just give you a deadline so you know.
And it's documented.
Yeah,
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay, fair enough.
thank you very much for your feedback.
And the thing is, in the model, not necessarily from the School Boards Association, but from the act itself, you know, you'll probably find, you know, some, you know, resource there.
Okay.
Well, thank you for asking.
Board committee reports and updates.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Administrate, support staff in negotiations, proceeding very well. We're reaching a point where we should be at a conclusion. There's still some monetary issues to be decided, but hopefully will be resolved in the foreseeable future. I will give a finance committee report, even though we didn't technically have one. The audit report on your desk basically has some inaccuracies on page 11 that Jacob and I discovered today. So, and he's following up with the auditor, and the sum of it is our unappropriated fund balance is not 4.6 million, it's 3.5. Because as you may recall, the taxpayers generously adopted an $800,000 reserve for capital improvements. And in the last budget, we committed $1,090,000 and some weird dollar number. I don't know how you came up with that one, Jacob, but something like 467. I would have just rounded it, but that's okay. And that's not reflected here. It's the 675, which was the previous year.
Right.
So the net effect is like a $1.1 million decrease in the unappropriated fund balance. The total fund balance is the same, so it's not like we lost the money. It's just we only have discretion over 3.5 versus 4.6. And I don't think the facilities committee met since we've last met. Okay, I'm done.
But I would notice that despite that mistake, they still give us a clean bill of health, which is really sweet. Some of us remember the days in which that was not true.
Yeah, correct.
Well, stuff coming from the SBA goes to you guys as soon as I get it in my inbox. I forward it to you guys so that you can have it. Hartford Community Coalition, we're fixing to have our first meeting of the new year next week. We've got 3 new board members coming on board, which is real exciting for us. We are now doing policy reviews and evaluations for our 3 employees. And also we're revising the employee handbook. So, and the block party is tentatively scheduled for the 14th of June. Okay, and that's all I've got.
You didn't find the treasure?
Didn't fire the treasurer, no.
Darn.
Not yet.
Future negotiations, we last met before Christmas. We're meeting again next week, I believe. We are making progress. I do not remember the exact agreed upon language in terms of what we said we would and would not say about it, but basically we're continuing to make progress and things are going amicably at this moment.
And that's great. And we know we're policy based.
Yeah.
Especially with the addition of new funding resources.
Yes, nothing has changed on that in terms of meetings, so development.
And as far as the manifests, and approval of those, they're going, very well. Jacob's team is doing a great job. Where we've needed to do modifications and corrections, they've been there. And those are the ones that are direct day-to-day operation pieces, and they show up in our audit, as being clean, those processes. As far as the DE&I, I will be attending the next district meeting, and we'll be looking at a number of things. I'm hoping, especially looking at Maggie's replacement and our process for moving that position forward. So I guess that would be from our committee perspective. Cool. So that brings us to public comments. We have a couple of publics here. Members of the public.
Hi, my name is Danielle Lemay, born and raised in this town. And I now have 2 children, and they're lovely. It's amazing being a mother. I actually moved back from Enfield, New Hampshire to raise my kids here in this town because, hurricane power, right? So it started off rocky, but until recently, I didn't realize how rocky this road was going to be. Sorry, I'm emotional about this. Since my son has hit the middle school, we have had 2 very, very dangerous interactions. I'll say that. But the first one was my son was choked and he was turning colors. And when he reported this, the teachers looked at him. He had petechia, he had spotting all over his face. And the teacher took the other kid's side and said, well, he said he only gave you a noogie. And my son was like, no, that's not what happened. Okay. What happened was assault. My son should have never had to go through that, for 1. For 2, the teacher should have seen my son when he reported this and said, clearly, that's not what happened, and pulled us parents in. Instead, I had to go ahead and be a mother and a bear and walk in and make a huge scene just so that it was heard. That shouldn't happen. Okay. And that was the first incident. And there really wasn't a resolve from that other than, well, we don't know what to do. The next incident was that during this first few, whatever goes on in the middle school, the next incident was that there was a young girl whose life was threatened, that her throat was going to get slit. We're talking 6th graders here. That doesn't just come out of the blue. That's at home business, And it was supposedly dealt with. Well, that child has a twin, so they're living under the same roof. And just recently, that twin brought a knife to school, okay, in the middle school, where they're supposed to be safe. Except my son didn't see that knife until the end of the school day. So that left almost 6 hours of them being at school, where that knife wasn't even accounted for. Had no idea that it was even in the school. And when my son brought it to my attention when he got home, he said, these are his exact words, Mom, I've been reporting stuff ever since you told me to start going to Justin, the assistant principal, because my teacher wasn't doing anything about this. None of the bullying that I was facing was being taken care of. None of the incidences were getting taken care of. They were just getting put to the wayside, Mom. So what was gonna happen? And I said, well, there's a lot that's gonna happen because we're gonna go in tomorrow morning and we're gonna report this to both principals, you and me. We're gonna have a front. And he was like, okay, Mom, okay. We got in there Thursday morning of this past week. And we sat with Tristan Upson and we sat with Justin. And Justin sat right beside me because I've had multiple conversations with him about how I think the school needs to change. With that being said, we reported this. Since then, I was assured that these two children, their bags were going to get searched every day for 2 weeks. And then after that 2 weeks, what was going to happen was some periodic checking of the bags. Or Wednesday, these kids have been seen going into school and their bags aren't being checked. These two kids have been making anonymous threats to other kids. And because nothing's being done about it, these kids are now sitting there scared. Scared that because they went and reported, there's going to be some retaliation. Scared because they don't know what's coming from these kids. And no one's checking in on it. We all know what just happened in Ohio with a 6-year-old. And these are our kids in Hartford. So spending, I understand, you know, all of that. I know numbers because I work in a business here in the Upper Valley, family run and owned for many years. I know numbers. I know where we need to cut edges and, you know, paste here, pull there. I get it. But what really needs to happen is because the middle school is really out of control, we need to get someone in there to protect our children before something seriously happens. It's a godsend that we had a month or two between the two incidences. But the fact that it's coming out of the same household for these two children that are threatening people, we need to act now before someone gets hurt. I don't know how, I don't know where. I'd be happy to help pull this together, but we need a resource officer. We need somebody in that school, either walking the halls, making sure that these kids feel safe while they're at school. Because you now have kids that don't want to go to school, that are sick to their stomach. They're in and out of the hospital because their parents think that there is something physically wrong with them. Because they keep saying, this is what's going on. I'm getting bullied. This is what's going on. But the administrative, whether it's the principals or what have you, I love Justin. He is going to do great things, but he can't have his hands tied. And he needs the support from his principal to get these things done. And if he's honestly trying to fix these things and they're not being followed through on the other aspect, he needs more support. A resource officer can be in there to help him support and to help make sure these kids feel safe. Help so that these kids see this person in the hallway and they're like, heck yes, we don't have to worry about that tomorrow. Because this person right here, this person is going to help make sure that these troubled kids get brought to the principal's office and they're not just brushed away. The problems can't be brushed away anymore because what started out as a little tiny grain of sand is now that mountain that's going to come at all of us that we have to figure out how to solve. And let's do it before it ends up in a tragedy. You know, I hear a lot of the numbers that you guys were pushing around. Can I just point out that there is a huge increase of these housing people that are coming in and buying up these houses? But what we all forget is we were in a pandemic and people came to the mountains to be safe instead of in the cities where all of this pandemic and COVID was like insane. So yeah, I want to urge you guys, maybe take a year and wait until things mellow out before you start trying to jump through, because us as taxpayers don't want to have to carry that burden of people all of a sudden selling houses like crazy out of Queechee and then they're gone. Or all these plates that we're seeing up at Dothan Brook, Texas, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Those people are going to be like, oh, it's starting to be safe back home. We're headed. And then what are we left with as taxpayers here in this town? Nothing but the burden and the aftermath. You know, we have problems in the middle school. We got to solve that. But we also have big problems with taxes. It's prioritizing. But kid safety has got to come first. And I don't mean any ill will towards Tom DeBalzi. He's been great. He's been a sounding board for me since I just wasn't being heard at the middle school. I kind of got brushed because I'm like, you guys got to pay attention to this. You got to pay attention to this. And then no emails, no callbacks, like there's follow through and it's not getting done. Something's got to change. Policies, you know, some of the administrative work, maybe getting someone else in there to help out with some of the problems. But kid safety has to come first. And every single one of you guys were preaching how you're right behind the kids. You want to do more for the kids. You got to make sure they're safe to get to the high school age first. It's a scary world. But these ones, they're the ones that go to the high school to play your sports that you're so-called funding to make big time changes there. You know, I'm sorry to bring it to you guys' attention this way, but we got to do something.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
No, as you probably saw, you know, we usually, you know, have a process for dealing with this as a board. Because we are responsible for the safety of all 1,300 or physically 1,500 kids that we have in this district. Our response in this case, I think it's necessary for us to request that the superintendent come back, even though we said that that next board meeting would be a, you know, a one topic meeting. I think being that this case is being referenced, is that important that we would want the other item of business on that, you know, single item meeting that we thought we were going to do be this. Some we want to hear what the plan is, and then or what has happened.
Yeah, glad to.
Yeah.
We have a public comment from online as well. So I don't want to interrupt if you're still going, but before you move to next topic.
Next person.
Okay. Can you promote Kristen Connors? Whatever would allow her to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
hear you.
Hi. My name's Kristen, also a mother of 3 at Hartford, also a Hartford alumni and a Hartford resident and a local business owner. I just want to kind of back Danielle up a little bit in my experience with the middle school. You know, all 3 of my kids have gone through, 2 are still at Dothan Brook, which has been an amazing experience for me. But the transition from the middle school to, or from the elementary school to the middle school has been an absolute complete nightmare. And that, you know, the lines are kind of blurred in regards to the respect portion of it, I think. You know, the part where you come in and the teachers want to be friends with everybody, but yet when the kids back talk and then they get mad, and I don't know how many emails I get. Now my daughter's not perfect, I'll say it, but they how do you explain to somebody who's 11, 12 years old that we're acting as your friend here in the school district, but then we demand respect. So when you're disrespectful for us, we're gonna hand out these punishments to you. So I think there's kind of, you know, and I'm thinking to myself, this isn't something new. You know, I mean, the middle school, you're throwing 3 different schools with 3 different rules into one common school where all these kids are going through puberty, and you expect them all to get along, and then throw a bunch of adults who want to be everybody's friends and wonder why you've got all this hate and discontent and and no management or organization or anything. So, but grant you also, I wouldn't want to be a teacher in that middle school in this day and age either. I mean, they're all dealing with things I don't even want to deal with. I don't even like dealing with it with my own daughter. But I do have concerns, just like Danielle. My daughter was involved in an incident. And so I do have safety concerns for these kids. And I back up the fact that, when you're talking about allocating funds for this or that, like, you're prepping these kids to go be adults in the middle school and sending them off to be these humans that we're going to then send off to college. This is the most important time in their life, I feel, is middle school. And, I know that personally, if I ever walked into the school and looked at my vice principal, John Grant, and called him John to his face, do you know what he would have said to me? Absolutely not. I still remember to this day when I was in 4th grade, Larry Waters was the principal, and I walked by in 4th grade and I said, "Hey, Larry, nice to see you." And he goes, "Excuse me?" And he pulled me aside and said, "I'm Mr. Waters to you. You need to learn about respect." And I still to this day remember that exact moment in my life. And I was only 10 years old. So I just think that, I get wanting to create this environment where we're all, kind of respecting one another and being kind to one another. And, I don't care what anybody is. The main principle should be we're kind to one another, we're educating one another, and we're showing respect. And we're teaching them those tools to go to high school to be kind humans that are then being molded to be respectable, humans in the working environment who are now going to work, working for you, having jobs and doing all this stuff. And so I think this middle school is where you guys really need to be focusing your eyes on. I mean, I've talked to plenty of people who have had middle school or had experiences where they're in the same school from K to 8 before they go to high school. And that transition has been nothing but smooth because you're all going through the same thing together and you're learning to be kind to one another together. Not saying that I think you should dismantle all the elementary schools, but this is not something new that we all know that the middle school has been a nightmare. It's been a nightmare since I was there. We would think that at this point we would find a way for all of us to kind of piece these puzzles together to try to figure out how to make it work better and smoother. And I guess that's my main point. The respect and disrespect is a big thing for me. I don't allow my child to be disrespectful to teachers, and I don't approve of her calling her teachers by their first name because I think that's disrespectful at that age level. I guess maybe it's a different world now, but I would say for me, the big thing is focusing on the respect and the safety of these kids as we mold them and grow them to move on to the high school. And so that's really all I have to say from here.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks, Kristen.
So I think that, our original request, is the key, as far as response. And we will, go forward from there.
Mhm.
Peter and Russ, any other thoughts before we move on?
No, but this is something definitely to stay on track.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't want to comment tonight because
Yeah.
warned, but I'm happy to come up with a monitoring report to address the concerns and speak with the principal and assistant principal. Definitely take your concern serious. Sorry, my voice is getting worse as the night goes on. Oh, we've talked. I've talked with Kristen. I've talked with Ms. Lemaine. Certainly had a lot of conversations with the administration.
Um, That brings us to the consent agenda.
We do have a couple of appointments, Coach, that we added, before you were here, we added appointments. for the consent agenda. I'm on here, Carly Swenson, the new middle school art teacher, and Michelle Carlson, the middle school ELA teacher.
You have the 12-14 minutes.
Yeah.
Yep.
About 14 minutes, and Russ did a monitoring report on DP5.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just ask one question. Was my format okay?
Oh, yeah, yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Because it seemed to make it much easier for me than trying to do the historical spreadsheet type thing that we've done.
So much easier to read.
Yeah.
Okay. Move that we accept the consent agenda and welcome the new members of the Hartford
Second.
community.
So we have a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda. All in favor? Opposed? So moved. We've already discussed the next meeting agenda. It will probably be a special meeting. We'll also, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for attending.
Thank you. We know the next one will probably be a special meeting to discuss the monitoring report that we requested and the budget. And then the actual meeting, the second meeting of the month. We didn't have an activity schedule.
No, we did not.
Probably because of the upcoming, the budget season.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that was the logic that, and especially given what we're gonna be presenting, more is better.
Right.
And in the next meeting, I would like for my fellow board members to consider authorizing me or whatever to maybe even start doing some Instagram or YouTube videos explaining the budget in bite-sized nuggets. And I can take some hints from my brother who has 175,000 followers on Instagram. He's not talking school budgets though.
I'll bet not.
But I think the outreach is going to be critical this year.
Well,
Absolutely.
well, you've shared before that you wanted to be able to do that, and it only makes sense. And if you're comfortable developing those tools, so that people get a better understanding, then it only makes sense to go ahead and do it.
And I guess the other suggestion for maybe Tom and Roy to consider might be the enlistment of the class on community, what is it?
Community service.
Community service,
Oh,
because those people are definitely more technologically savvy than I'll ever be. And I don't mean to say those people, those young learners. But that way it doesn't all fall on me. I'm willing to do it, but I need some backup.
And the thing is, in that case, any time that's presented, could be towards their community service.
And I do think it also works into the civics part of that particular program. And that's why because educating them on how a budget works and the whole process, I think is important. And also trying to stress the importance of participation. Because too many taxpayers don't get involved enough. And I understand we're all way too busy, so I don't want to pass judgment. But we need to find ways to at least make it easier, and like bite-sized nuggets might be an easier way for people to at least gain some information versus an hour presentation where they're going to be falling asleep despite my fascinating personality.
And just another quick update, the Supreme Court is interested in starting its round of going back out to schools again. And we were scheduled for just before the pandemic, as you recall, and then it was like, so they're getting back into that. Their first visit will be the Vermont Law School, and I would hope that their next visit would be Hartford. So I'll get you the contact folks, and I already spoke to the Chief Superior Judge to get us back in the queue, and they're coming before it. I'll reach out and I'll get you guys the contact information, but prep the high school for letting them know. It would love to have them show our skill sets. So anyways, that's the update on that side. Meeting evaluation.
Did you vote on the consent?
We didn't vote on the consent agenda.
Yes, we did.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
I missed it too.
Guess my short-term memory's gone.
Yeah, it was moved and seconded,
Yes.
and then we voted, because we.
Wow.
Discussion.
Mine's a terrible thing always. Okay, so, all right. At the end of each board meeting, member and superintendent or appointed evaluator for the meeting completes this monitoring form. The responses are shared and a discussion is held on all areas that need improvement. The chair collects the completed forms to use in the board's monitoring process. Board was prepared for the meeting, satisfactory. Board's time was spent on ends, not means, very satisfactory. Each board member was given an opportunity to participate. I judge that to be satisfactory unless somebody says anything. Board treated all persons with courtesy and fairness, satisfactory. Board adhered to Robert's Rules of Order as appropriate, satisfactory. Board adhered to its adopted governance style. It emphasized outward vision. It encouraged diversity in viewpoints. It exercised strategic leadership, not administrative detail. It made distinction between board and staff roles. It used collective decision making. It looked to the future. And I'm going to say all satisfactory. And you'll miss me when I'm gone.
Nancy's got to do it.
Yeah. Good.
We're not going to let you off.
Sure, thanks.
All right.
Okay, so we do have an executive session, and we felt for transparency purposes, we should probably have three
So
different.
there are three different reasons for having the executive session. We're going to discuss three different issues.
Right.
Accordingly, I would move that pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1B, we find that it's necessary to have an executive session, and that we then enter into it for the following reasons: labor relations agreement with employees. Also under 313A1D, grievances, and under 313A3, the appointment, employment, or evaluation of a public officer or employee. So three different issues. So
And that, we're trying to help, ourselves and, the community to understand how important open meeting law is, and transparency is imperative, in that process. And we'd like to model that so that we can start building on our culture changes.
And additionally, we just have a lot of other things.
Right.
In the old days, that's what we say, we're going into executive session, talking about a whole bunch of stuff. So is there a second?
I'll second.
So we have a second to go into executive session to discuss the 3 items mentioned. All in favor?
I,
Opposed? So move. And we'll take a little mental health break. Before we move into that.
You've got various guests for various executive sessions.
Right.